Also a positive weekend for both Manchester clubs, but they did struggle a little bit. We'll talk about City first. I was super... I'm going to start with a bit of a shit sandwich, if I'm honest.
Okay, yeah.
So positives. Bonnie Shaw getting her first goal of the season. Prolific will probably be picking up the Golden Boot. I think I said that in our initial pre-season pod. I'd stand with that. I'm very firm on that. The link-up play between Shaw, Viv and Hemp I thought was absolutely stunning. I think it was only Brighton really being so resolute in their defending that really sort of prevented quite a lot of chances initially. And then there was just no conversion. It felt like a little bit like watching Arsenal. It was kind of like you've got all the firepower, you're making the right moves, you're in the box, but you're not finishing. And I don't understand that.
21 shots created.
But at the end of it,
on target.
So the bottom bit of bread, which is the positive bit, is that you got the win. And sometimes wins aren't pretty.
They're happy to win ugly.
Yeah,
and I think that's important for Manchester City because when they're in those tough games, is coming out with the win. And I think maybe in previous seasons, sometimes that's maybe slipped or they've allowed a team back into it. You look at that Arsenal game at the Joy Stadium last season. They thought they had the 1-0 lead, and this 1-0 is such a dangerous scoreline.
For sure.
Again, full of cliches today, but it's so true. You saw what happened with West Ham, Liverpool, and in all of these, the Arsenal game, the Man City game, the Man United game, they all scored in the first half. And I think
it's a long time.
Sitting in it for a whole half.
It's a long time to sit in an anxious state.
Especially against Brighton, because Brighton can create chances.
100%.
And they did. And I think Sophie Bagley had a great game. I think, she made, let me tell you how many saves she made. 6 saves, which I think is pretty incredible. Some really good ones. But I agree, they'll be frustrated with their lack of finishing. I think that will come. I think the fact that Bunny Shaw got on the score sheet midweek will have helped her. And it was a lovely, typical striker's goal from her. It's something the pundits picked up on at half time, and I did notice was that Miedema was playing probably a bit too far away from Shaw in terms of...
I hadn't picked up on that, to be fair.
And I think maybe not getting the best out of her that deep in midfield, and that I think they will work better closer together. But also I think huge credit to Brighton because they deserved a goal. Now I'm not sure they deserved to win the game.
For sure.
But I think they deserved a goal and City should have scored more.
Yeah.
But I do think they deserve to get on the score sheet because they did create chances.
I think a 3-1 would have been an accurate reflection, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe even a 3-2.
I think their Brighton defence, the discipline, and it's something that I think is changing as teams are professional for longer. They have access to these really top-notch facilities for longer. Obviously, they're getting better tactically and technically, but I think their discipline and concentration, doesn't dip in the way we've seen it in previous seasons maybe. And I think being able to be so disciplined against a Manchester City for so long is really impressive. And they were. And it's then that they just need their strikers to be more clinical when they get those opportunities.
Yeah. I do feel like there was players like Michelle Adjiman coming back and doing her defensive duties. And I think that was what I saw in Brighton. There was that kind of that extra 1% that they knew they were going to try and, catch Man City on the fly and then just kind of basically hunker down. But I think 100% they deserved a goal. There were complete lapses in concentration for Man City at the back. And I wasn't impressed with City, which is weird because obviously it did feel like it was a completely different kind of City that we'd seen the previous week where but they did have moments, I suppose, in that Arsenal game where they were a bit kind of hot, cold.
Yeah, and there could be an element of fatigue as well. They've just come off the back of a 3-game week. You can factor that in, but they have brought in that depth, at least in kind of midfield and up front, to help cover that. But yeah, I do think some of that credit does have to go to Brighton. And like Aston Villa, they look more comfortable in possession, which again is something that's changing over the seasons. Is there's not this kind of, which we saw sometimes at Crystal Palace. I thought they'd be good in the first phase, but then would just panic with the clearance, and half the time would end up hoofing it out closer to the goal than where they were, and giving Chelsea possession further up the pitch. Whereas, with Brighton and with Villa, when they break down those attacks, they're not afraid to play it out in those moments and not just clear it to the sky.
I mean, Brighton it was a heart in arse moment for a couple of those playing out from the back, where Man City were pressing the absolute life out of them, but they were so resolute in playing out from the back and keeping that, and I really rated that. It felt and often they were getting out. I reckon 75% of the time they actually got out of that. So
especially against Man City, because they have a good press.
Literally that. So credit to them. If you're kind of beating what I would probably consider the best team in the WSL for a press like that.
And Arsenal, I think Arsenal are good at pressing.
For sure, getting out of those positions, like credit to you. And Sophie Bagley was an absolute key part of that as well. There was some ridiculously accurate key threaded passes that managed to get them out of that. So credit to Bagley, because it kind of feels like, yeah, she's on a rise.
It's one of those difficult ones, isn't it? When you're trying to play that way, you need to be doing it regularly. And I think, what game was I watching? I think it was actually maybe the Spurs game, or maybe it was the Chelsea game, where I was next to someone who was saying, why do they keep playing it out from the back? And I'm like, well, they already know the game's gone. So actually, by continuing to practice against some of the best teams that are doing it, it's a good way to get that practice in high pressure moments. Like, for Brighton to be doing it in a game they could have gotten a goal from, up against one of the best at it, like, hats off to them. I think that takes a lot of bravery.
100%. Yeah, I was super impressed with Brighton, despite the scoreline. I thought that was a really tasty little performance.
And a better indicator of maybe what to expect from Brighton. You know, last week they kind of, I wouldn't say ran riot over Everton. I think the scoreline not flattered them, but I do think Everton had created chances. And I think, you know, once the second and third goal went in, their heads dropped. But I think it was a better indicator of what we can expect from Dario's team, because he is a new manager. He is unknown. You know, a lot of the players are saying you're going to be excited when you see us this season. And I think that game, there was a lot of people on social media saying, this Brighton excites me.
Yeah, for sure. And they now sit 6th in the table.
Stop the count. Oh, they were first last week. Oh,
yeah, well, I mean, it's a big drop, but it's a good and reasonable drop. Captain Alex Greenwood said after the game that sometimes in this league you have to win ugly, which is pretty much what you said at the very start. She also joked after the game that she's begging Steph Houghton to come back every single day. I don't think Steph's replaceable. That's the bottom line. I mean, that's unusual.
Well, I mean, she didn't play that much last season, so it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was more her presence, like her presence in the team as a whole, the kind of the leadership that she had. But
and Steph was there doing some wonderful punditry.
She was. It was really nice to see that little link up, on the BBC. One of the other players that was kind of missing, and I will just like touch on this briefly because obviously I will throw in goalkeepers at any chance. Kiara Keating, not present again in the WSL. Only started the season once for the UEFA Women's Champions League game.
The UEFA.
I was like, where am I going with that sentence? I don't know what's I obviously. I just feel disappointed.
I know.
For her. That's all I want to say on it. Okay. I don't know whether this is going to continue, but it looks like it might. And that's what I'm going to say on it.
Well, they've got a lot of games now. They're in the group stages of the Champions League. They're going to have a lot more games to manage, and they're going to need that depth. And they've got 2 very, very good keepers. So
FA Cup, Conti Cup, the rest of them.
They've got another player coming back. Jill Roord.
Nailed it. Absolutely nailed the segue. Nice.
Honestly. But like, she did that in January, didn't she? That's 9 months.
That is probably one of the quickest ACL rehabs that I've seen in quite a long time. She made her comeback in the 80th minute, only 249 days after suffering an ACL injury. Wow. She replaced Miedebart and received a huge round of applause from both sets of fans. And then after the game, she was kind of saying like how much the medical staff had helped her at Man City and how lovely it was. And I thought that was a really touching moment. A lot of big love for Jill Roord.
Welcome back.
In the WSL. Yeah, for sure. Layla asked on Instagram, how will Roord, Viv, Park and Hasegawa all fit? Or is this about rotation for Taylor?
That is a great question. It's a good headache for a manager to have, I think.
Isn't it just?
I think you'd rather be like, oh my God, which world-class player am I going to put out there? You know what I mean?
You could just eeny, meeny, miny, moe at most games.
And as I touched on with the goalkeeper situation, they will have a lot of games. They will have a lot of important games. They're going to need to rely on their squad depth. It takes some of the pressure off some players as well, that, you know, you don't have to be absolute top of your game every single match you play. You can come off at 60 minutes and have someone world-class come in and take your spot. So, got to be interested to see, especially with Roord coming back so quickly. I didn't think she'd come back so quickly.
For sure.
So, that will be interesting to see how he juggles them.
And obviously with them being in the Champions League, having to compete on all 4 fronts this season, I mean, rotation is going to be key. And especially for someone like Roord, like despite her getting her initial first minutes this weekend, like it is still a process and you won't want to overload her too quickly. So I think we'll probably see the same thing where they just build up her minutes, maybe give her 20 minutes at the end or 30 minutes and sort of gradually see her in that way. So I think for now, let's not put too much pressure on Roord. Yeah.
And like people's recovery is so different. You look at, say, like a Beth Mead who probably came back in the best way. And then you look at, say, a Viv or a Leah who took a little bit, and the reason I'm using Arsenal players is because they had so many bloody injuries, but it just takes some players a little bit longer, and it also depends on the position they play and the kind of loading on their body and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no pressure on Ward, but wonderful to see her back all the same.
Yeah. Right, let's go over to the other side of, well, near Liverpool, really. Everton lost against Manchester United this weekend due to a 4th-minute goal from
She's ice cold.
Glacier Clinton. Man United have won 2-2 after beating Everton 1-0 this weekend. Before kickoff and for much of the first half, fireworks were going off outside the stadium behind Courtney Brosnan's goal. I can only say they were planned by Everton in some ways, like a new, pre-game activation. I think that's,
sure. Yeah. Although that would make me nervous, given their ground was set alight a couple of seasons ago. Do you remember that? I'd be like, keep any fireworks.
Is that the fire alarm that went off?
No, do you not remember the scaffolding thing was set alight next to Walton Hall Park? Well, that was around the stadium. I'd just be like, keep the fireworks away from this pitch.
But I really rate the energy in trying to spice things up for the pre-match.
Were there any fireworks on the pitch, Chloe? That is the question.
That's a really, really good question, actually. I'd say the biggest firework was Grace Clinton. 2 goals in 2 games for this youngster. She got the winner against her former club. She's the first player to score in her first 2 WSL games for United.
It was a shit goal. Not on her, but Everton. Like, what are you doing? It was a hospital pass. They were playing out from the back.
Clumsy.
No pressure. I think it was Van Havermaert. Absolute hospital pass to Grace Clinton, free, wide open, in the middle of the pitch, and she just ran in and scored. Hats off to you for finishing that. But
I was going to say, like, it wasn't, even though it was a ridiculously bad pass and she was one-on-one with the keeper, it still wasn't an easy one to finish. She didn't have a lot of time to think about what she was going to do with it, and the keeper was coming out pretty flipping fast. So, like, credit to her for kind of giving that, like, feint to the right-hand side and, like, burying it in the left, like, all day. Like, that takes a lot of skill. Like, the decision-making in those moments, like, we're seeing City struggle with that, like, with much more experience. So
I do think, though, for Everton, what will be so frustrating for them is that they essentially gave that goal away
all day.
Ended up playing pretty well. It's, and you look at the stats, they've got pretty evenly matched in terms of shots on target. So they'll be frustrated. They had opportunities to score goals. They'll be frustrated that the manner in which they lost, I think, because they probably felt like they could have at least come out of that game with a point.
For sure.
So that's what I mean. Like, that's what's so frustrating about the way they conceded.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think let's also talk a little bit about the summer signings that Manchester United have had and sort of like where Grace Clinton, I suppose, is placed in those. Obviously, like, she spent her last season with Spurs before coming back into the fold. Everyone's super, super happy about that in the United camp, not so much in the Spurs camp. Do we think that she's going to be the difference in this season, given how she's started and also given, I suppose, the talent that Man United have brought in? Dominic Janssen, Elizabeth Turland, trying to think of who else. Céline Bizet. Like, that's a biggie.
Yeah, and they're taking a little while to find their feet. I think Grace Clinton has seamlessly slotted in. I think after the season she had at Spurs, getting the call up to the seniors, confidence is really high, and I think you can tell and you can see that on the pitch. I think she's linking up really well with the players in and around her. So yeah, she'll probably be she'll be a big difference and have a big impact on their season, I reckon.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. It is weird for someone so young to be so confident and so kind of set in their position in that way. And I think it's probably given Serena a lot of food for thought in terms of, starting to concrete her place a little bit more in the Lionesses as we lead up to Le Euros. Manchester United fan Arisa asked us on Instagram, are Manchester United the dark horses of the WSL that no one is talking about? That's a really, really interesting question, Rita. I wouldn't say that we are the dark horses. I think it's very, very early days is what it is in the WSL at the moment. And I think obviously given the transitional period that the club has kind of gone through over this summer and the last summer, really kind of losing a lot of key players, but also making some pretty decent signings. Obviously a lot of turbulence over summer with what happened with the port cabins. I think it's a good start, but I wouldn't say...
Not of that performance necessarily, but the main thing is they got the win, and that'll be key.
Yeah, for sure.
In those scrappy games to come out with the 3 points.
You're grinding out those results and getting the job done. You now sit second in the table on points with Chelsea, 2 on 2, and you're the only club, the only 2 clubs in the WSL to do that. So yeah, absolutely strong. Do I think you're going to go on and... Do I think Manchester United are going to go on and win the league or be title contenders? And it hurts me to say this, as a Manchester United fan, probably not.
I think the game against Chelsea, when it eventually happens, and it would have come next weekend, we'll get on to why it's not. would have been a really good test for them to really see where they are at. So maybe the fact that it's not come yet is a benefit for them. It gives them a little bit more time to bed in their new players, get them sharper in front of goal. But that will be a real indicator of where they're at.
100%. Well, it's interesting actually that the Sunday week after, Sunday the 13th of October, because they've got the postponed game against Chelsea, they place Tottenham, which will be quite a nice little matchup, to be fair.
All right, Grace, welcome back.
I was going to say, Grace going head to head with her sort of former Loney club. But also I think I'm seeing a lot of potential with Spurs and Manchester United, given how close things were last season.
That'll be a good matchup.
Yeah, it does feel like that.
Given United beat them 4-0 in the FA Cup final.
100%. I do think that maybe the balance has kind of shifted a little bit and it's going to be more equal. But also I feel like these two clubs are ones that are going to be sitting around that kind of fourth spot, sniffing around sort of Champions League football potentially alongside, Liverpool were giving me that indication last year.
They'll have a little bit more time to prepare for that as well.
100%. We will definitely get on to controversial corner in a second. Let's talk a little bit about Everton. Summer signing Inmar Gabaro was stretched off with a knee injury early into the first half.
That looked really bad.
Yeah, it didn't look...
She was in so much pain.
Great. And obviously this news comes off the back of last week with Aurora Ghali sustaining an ACL injury in their previous first game of the season against Brighton. Listener Heidi asked on Instagram, how do you think Everton will manage the season with so many injuries? And I think it's devastating because they are key players. They're huge to the squad.
I just think as well, those two injuries are like, because you can look at a player and be like, why do they keep tweaking their hamstring? Or why do they keep getting this injury? They're like freak injuries.
Yeah.
That's the such a sucker punch for the squad, the club, because there's not a huge amount you can really do to prevent something like that from happening, those kind of freak injuries, and to have potentially, from what Brian Sorensen said, it's not good. Potentially one of the most serious injuries in that they'll be out for the season happening in the opening 2 weeks is such a sucker punch because they went through it last season and they did well despite everything they went through last season. I think Aurora Ghali was a key member of that squad and a key member of helping Everton perform the way they did because she played in practically every single position. And I think having that flexibility of that type of player was huge for them. To not have her, it's just, I just can't, I can't imagine if you're an Everton fan, you'd be like, again, really?
That is such bad luck. That is honestly such bad luck. And I think, it's not a great start to the season with them picking up 2 major injuries and also losing both games. And it doesn't feel fair because I feel like they've been sort of making the right kind of noises around being their kind of maybe breakthrough year where we don't sit and sort of have these massive concerns about whether they're going to end up at the bottom of the table again. And it kind of feels like it could be going that way without...
It's hard as well because at the club, things aren't going to be great behind the scenes financially. That's also something players have to deal with, will be in their periphery. So to then have stuff like this start to happen, they'll be like, oh, seriously, I can't catch a break.
Yeah, for sure. Well, from us at the Upfront team, obviously sending a lot of love and support to Everton as a whole for the bad luck and fortune that you guys have had at the start of the season, and also to Inmar Gabaro as well.